Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of Digitally Transformed. I'm your host, Melissa, and today I have a lovely guest with me. His name is Phil Magnuszewski. You've heard from him a couple times on the podcast. He's our former Chief Operating Officer here at Infused Innovations and is now officially Infused Innovations' very first Chief Innovation Officer. And today we are going to talk to you about why you should always be pursuing a culture of innovation in your organization. I am so thrilled to have you on here today, Phil. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
First of all, congrats on your new role at Infused Innovations as the first Chief Innovation Officer.
Thank you.
Can you comment on what this means and why it's so important for Infused and our clients?
Yeah. Again, thanks, Melissa, for having me. As always, and since our inception here at Infused, it's been important for us here to live and breathe and kind of walk the walk in terms of what we're asking of our clients. And what I mean by that is that we're always pushing and prodding and asking our clients to be more innovative, to take a look at what's coming around the corner and to see which innovations might make sense for the organization. So we're really asking them to take the innovation process seriously. And if we're asking our clients to do that, we should be asking that of ourselves as well. So in order for us to do a better job of that here, it was imperative that we really had someone who's dedicated to driving that within the Infused Innovations organization and also helping our clients do the same in theirs. So I've had some conversations with Jeff over the past year, our CEO here, for those who aren't familiar with Jeff Wilhelm. And we've been talking about it for a while. And, we finally thought that the timing was right. And it's truly an honor for me to be the first Chief Innovation Officer here at Infused Innovations. The other cool thing is that it allows me, and one of my personal passions is really around emerging technology. It allows me in the organization to keep a constant eye on what's going on in the emerging technology market. I personally love all the changes that are going on right now, the improvements, the announcements, the things that are happening in our industry right now. And to be clear, I'm not just talking about Microsoft or cloud technologies per se, but I'm talking about things that are happening in areas like robotics, things that are happening in 3D printing, advances in material sciences and nanotechnology, and also things like mobile and connectivity, things like 5G, kind of what that brings to the table for organizations that wasn't previously available. And to be clear also, Melissa, that innovation isn't just about technology. It involves people and process, and a lot of cultural components come into it when you're talking about innovation with organizations. But technology is kind of what we do here. I kind of, through the course of this conversation, we'll be viewing innovation through the lens of technology. And the really awesome and valuable thing that this position brings to the table is that it allows us not just to look at what's happening in the market 12 months from now, but what's going to be happening over the next 3 to 5 years, right? We get an early look at a lot of new technologies, and this is going to allow us to do an even better job at better advising our clients on the things that are going to be important for the business years from now.
Absolutely. I love how you mentioned the people and the culture. It is so important in any avenue or area of your business to be focusing on that. Talk to us about what exactly innovation is. Dive a little bit deeper into why it matters for organizations. So why is it so important for these businesses to always be innovating?
Sure. So from a simple definition standpoint, innovation can be a new idea, a new product or a method. That means like workflow within an organization as well. That's translated into a good or service that creates value for which customers would be willing to pay. Essence of innovation is really about improvement, whether that's large or small, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but also the ability to create something new, something better, and then to launch that into the world. Innovation matters so much right now. The stark reality of the world that we live in today is that organizations that fail to be innovative, that fail to internalize this and make this part of their culture, are likely going to have a pretty tough time over the next 3 to 5 years. Things are just changing so fast. On one hand, it's really awesome to be part of this and be in the middle of it. On the other hand, it's tough for organizations to keep up. But if you look at any of the statistics that are out there, whether it's from Gartner or IDC, or even from other firms like McKinsey, I was reading an article from McKinsey the other day, and by their analysis, that over the next 10 years, we're likely to see more innovation as a result of emerging technologies than we've seen over the past 100 years. And
Wow.
I just want to pause for a second because that is such an incredible statistic to kind of put out there.
Yeah, that's massive.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And we've already seen a number of examples over the past, 20 years where a new company with an innovative approach or even a new business model that was, capable or enabled by newer technologies, they've come and totally turned an industry on its head. I mean, we all know the example of Netflix, right? Blockbuster was the kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the industry. And then here comes Netflix, totally different model. Yeah, just delivering, CDs to your mailbox. And then, within a couple of years, they were delivering it digitally, right, over the internet. Who would have thought that? And then we've seen other examples like, what Uber's done to the taxi industry. An old industry that didn't want to change. It was difficult. There was friction in that interchange with customers. And then, the other thing is another one that in fact I personally use all the time now is Airbnb. What Airbnb has done to the hotel and motel industry, right?
Oh yeah, you gotta love Airbnb. Awesome places, great deals, flexibility. Yes. It's easy to book, so much better than just, and you get that nice original stay instead of just staying at a hotel, which, when you're traveling to a new place, sometimes you want that new experience. And some Airbnbs even have like that cultural experience tied to it as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And these companies have totally redefined their markets, which is awesome to see. And it's not just about the commercial businesses too, right? But the need to innovate also extends into, it could be nonprofits. It could be other non-government organizations. It could be the government themselves. There are a number of challenges that we're currently facing across the globe that are going to require a different way of thinking. A new approach, innovation in the areas of things like healthcare, social inequity, and climate change, for that matter, right, are going to require innovative solutions because the current solutions just frankly aren't working. Not saying that technology is the only answer. As I mentioned before, there's other pieces to this equation, but it definitely can be part of the solution. And I love this quote. I have it hanging on my wall, but I've historically been a fan of Jack Welch and some of the things that he's done over the years in terms of mentoring business leaders. And he has a quote that says, "When the rate of change inside an institution becomes slower than the rate of change outside, the end is in sight. The only question is when." And again, I can't overemphasize this enough. It's going to be more important now than it's ever been before for organizations to really take this seriously.
That's a very powerful quote. And I love all of your examples. I think sometimes it can be hard for organizations to even imagine, how can I innovate? What would this look like for me? And I think just hearing these examples of things that we use every day that we maybe take for granted, that process of innovation that it took to get there, and the fact that it actually came from another organization or another idea that someone had, and then they just took it and innovated it. Can you give us just a couple more examples? Because I think this is so helpful for people to truly understand what it means to innovate.
Yeah, for sure. You don't have to just be in a high-tech industry to think about innovation. I'll give you an example. So I live in an area that's going through a lot of growth in terms of people moving into, I live in southern New Hampshire. And there's a lot of new building going on. So I'll take an example of being a building contractor or a construction company. So anyone who's been trying to find a contractor or trying to find someone to build their home over the past 18 months in particular has had a hard time doing that. Part of it is because, it's tough trying to find and keep laborers for those type of organizations. And it makes forecasting incredibly challenging for the contractors or construction companies to meet the demand that they're kind of faced with. So, one of the things that any organization that's trying to look at innovation seriously should be doing a couple things, but one of them is scouting what technologies, what solutions are out there in the marketplace that can change up their industry, right? Whether in a small way or a big way. So if you take a look at the construction industry, there's been, and you look at kind of what's going on from a technology standpoint, whether they're adjacent technologies or direct technologies. I live up in New England. So if you consider the progress that a company like Boston Dynamics is doing in the area of robotics, and if you're listening to this podcast, haven't heard of Boston Dynamics, Google it. You'll see the videos. They've been all over the news. But I'm not sure if you've seen this particular video, but they've released a video where there's a robot actually putting up drywall. So if you think about, the ability for construction companies to deal with the shortage of workers, the ability even to work on building a house 24/7 as well. Looking at technologies like robotics to do some pieces of house fabrication is pretty cool. Now, it's not being done commercially today, but it's kind of being piloted and it's kind of new, but you can see what kind of impact that's going to have in that industry probably within 5 years from now. Very, very cool stuff. So if I'm responsible for innovation at a construction company, and there's a lot of large firms out there that are building, whether it's infrastructure type projects or homes, apartments, buildings, those kind of things as well. I'm trying to understand and internalize how some of these trends are going to impact my particular business. I'm also trying to figure out how do I manage all these things that are out there, right? I may have ideas that I may see that there's half a dozen different technologies that might have impact, but how do I start going about curating kind of what's out there and understanding what impact they're going to have in my organization as well? I always want to have a number of ideas that we're kind of going through, that we're cycling through as an organization, evaluating, and then also, piloting and having, proofs of concepts and building out prototypes and kind of testing and trying things out. Again, going back to, the thought of having a innovative culture, you've got to continue to keep trying and testing things.
Yeah, definitely. Your example really made me think of the example of how grocery stores now have a lot of those self-checkout systems. And I know people were terrified of that for a really long time, but it kind of goes hand in hand with having, the in-person checkout workers as well. And it's helped with the amount of people who are standing in line and wait times in line and people who just want to get their stuff and get out. And the robotics one is so impressive. One thing I'll say is that I think for some organizations, some executives, they might think those innovative projects feel pretty far-fetched for them or so out in the future or not something that they are quite ready for yet. So what would you say to them?
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. That's a valid concern. And I would start by saying that while some of these ideas may sound futuristic or far-fetched, they're likely a lot closer than most people think. So I will throw that little bit of caution out there to organizations that are thinking that way. But yes, there are some things that are more, I would say, present and available in terms of things that you can do to be more innovative in your organization. But yes, things are moving really, really fast. Yeah, innovation doesn't always have to mean taking a huge leap forward. It can also be about making small changes to a current product or service or workflow even that might have exponential benefits to the organization or to the consumer. There are degrees of innovation. An example might be, with COVID over the past 18 months or so, we've changed the way that we've shopped, right? So we've always had e-commerce, right, which has been one way for organization or for an individual to interact with a Target or a Walmart or your local shop down the street. We've always had things like for restaurants, there's been, call ahead, pick up, delivery services and things like that as well. But there's been kind of this middle ground that's emerged over the course of the past 18 months where there's, you order ahead and there's curbside pickup now. Nothing really crazy or different about that. The technologies to support that have kind of been there, but it's really someone that, and it was driven, by necessity to some extent, but it's allowed organizations to more closely engage with their customers. Again, using things that were already available, the technology was already there. It was just an application of those technologies in a different way. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense that it doesn't have to be these pie in the sky or these moonshots, if you will, of applying new technologies that are really kind of cutting edge, but things that are there, but just being applied in a different way because someone thought, or in this case, organizations were pushed to kind of look at those.
Yeah, I think that's a great example and really puts things into perspective, especially with the new virtual office. Now we're able to have a workflow and a system where, we don't have to have that in-person communication and contact and workflow, and we're able to work on our own. So it is really interesting. And on a related note, talk to us about why innovation can fail sometimes, because I'm sure that there are organizations that are excited to innovate and maybe their plan just totally flops or fails. Can you talk to us about why they fail?
Yeah, and that's a very real concern. And first off, I'll say that innovation should be trying to solve a problem, right? Innovation for innovation's sake typically doesn't work. Unless you're, a true R&D lab and you just, you have a bunch of really smart guys and gals on staff that are really just doing what we call kind of core research. It doesn't work, right? If you're an organization with limited resources, you want to make sure you're using those resources to get closer to your customer, to launch a new product, and do something that's going to be of real value to your organization. So I'll say that innovation fails in a lot of cases because while most organizations understand they need to do it and want to do it, it still requires a ton of hard work. It requires an organizational culture that supports the innovation process. It requires an organizational culture that says it's okay to take calculated risks, an organizational culture that allows for cross collaboration between individuals and teams and departments, and even external parties. It requires an organizational culture that's seriously interested in making investment in the right ideas in the right areas. One of the biggest challenges around this is that most organizations don't have a formal innovation process, right? There's no framework for them to kind of look at and say, hey, look, how do I go from idea to launch of a product or service or whatever the end result is going to be? They don't simply have the ability to manage innovation. There's no formal way for them to marshal ideas through a process that gets them to a point where they're having a positive impact on the organization.
Okay, that is so fascinating to me. You said innovation management. So tell us what exactly that is, what it entails, and would you consider this as a first step in becoming more innovative?
Yeah, I consider it a foundational component of truly building a culture of innovation in an organization. So innovation management really is the ability to manage innovation holistically for the organization. And I don't care if you're doing this on a piece of paper, which, this is 21, shortly going to be 2022, or leveraging a piece of technology, right, to kind of help with that. But you do need that to manage that process from idea inspiration to like full-blown deployment and support of that particular idea. And it all starts with kind of the first piece of this, Melissa, is the curation of the ideas. How am I getting people to provide them to the organization? Or in some cases, organizations are setting up, I'm using air quotes here, challenges, right? So an organization's leadership might say, hey, look, we want to figure out how to enhance a product. We want to figure out how to better service our customers. And they'll kind of throw those ideas out there. But in throwing them out there, how do you collect the ideas, right? How do you get people to put them out there in the first place? And how do you capture the collective wisdom of your employees and stakeholders, have them vote on them, how to have them kind of interact with those ideas? How do I rank them? How do I enhance them? All of those things in terms of managing and curating those ideas. So the next stage really involves, how is the organization then going to evaluate those ideas, right? How are you going to measure them up against corporate metrics, right? Who's going to be involved? Who's going to make the decisions on those things? Are there internal rates of return that the organization is looking for? Are there, additional KPIs that might come into play as well? So you got curation, you've got evaluation, and then once you decide as an organization what you want to work on, how do you work on it, right? There are a lot of organizations. I mean, the Fortune 500 organizations, a lot of them do a good job with this and have formal groups kind of set up. They have their own innovation labs in some cases to do this, but once I've evaluated my ideas, how do I then launch them, right? What process is needed to build out a proof of concept or to pilot the idea? Many organizations we work with don't necessarily have the infrastructure, the workflows, the people, the resources to do that kind of stuff. So those are things that need to be considered. And the last stage of this is the formal rollout and adoption of the idea, either internally within the organization or with external parties or with clients. Getting something production ready or client ready requires a different set of skills, right? And a different thought process. You're talking about something that's going to be used on a regular basis, that's going to be client facing in a lot of cases. So, is the organization or does the organization need to be trained? What's the support mechanism going to be? What's the ongoing feedback going to be with your clients? So there's a lot that kind of goes into it. And as I mentioned, a lot of organizations don't have experience in doing this, Melissa. And that's one of the things that I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a foundational element of really building a culture of innovation and something that's critically important.
Obviously, one piece to this is innovating and having that culture and the people who feel that they can come to you with ideas and share ideas. But then there's that other piece, which is being strategic about it, making sure that you have systems in place and operations. And it totally makes sense. You've given us a great idea of what innovation management is and why it's important. So thank you for that. Would you say that this is a new role that majority of organizations are starting to look to fill as they undergo digital transformation and continue to innovate over time?
Yeah, I do think in talking to organizations, a lot of them are thinking about this. And I do think it's a role most organizations are going to want to fill, either with an internal resource who's full-time, or a partner or somebody doing it part-time who's still responsible for it. But you got to have someone in the organization who's appointed to it who can help guide the process with all the other stakeholders in the organization. I don't think it's going to be a choice. I think if you're going to be relevant and continue to be relevant as an organization, you have to do something in this space. The challenge, though, as with any role, is finding the right person, the right team with the right skill sets and experience to kind of, lead this up. For example, someone who's dedicated to managing innovation within an organization is going to have to be strong in communications and collaboration. Someone who's a creative thinker, but also analytical, because a lot of this stuff is going to be data-driven as well. A strong understanding of organizational workflow and organizational behavior, and someone who's empathetic and able to deal with people as well as the organization at large, and someone who really understands and believes in the whole design thinking process, right? Kind of looking at a product or service or whatever the challenge is with a fresh set of eyes, right? With no constraints, with no baggage or legacy to kind of contend with, and then kind of rebuilding what would be done in essence, if you were a startup. So having the ability to wear multiple different hats, to think with different parts of the brain, again, that's not an easy skill set to find. And going back to one of my original comments, though, it's not going to be nice to have. It's going to be a must. To the extent that it needs to be full, a part-time person will depend on the organization, depends on the size of the organization, the industry, and the level of commitment by the organization's leadership around making innovation a priority.
Anyone who makes decisions in their organization could be listening to this and thinking, hey, we're looking to build out an innovation program, or we're just generally trying to be more innovative. So what recommendations would you give to those organizations?
There are three main recommendations that I would give to an organization who's interested in really building out an innovation program. First, much like digital transformation, my belief is that an organization has to be all in it at the executive level. You can't dabble in it because if the employees don't think you're taking it seriously, they're not going to take it seriously. And in order for you to really get the value out of a program like this, it's got to be an organization-wide thing. Second, a great framework or something to leverage by which you'll manage the innovation process, as I mentioned earlier. Without that in place, kind of a scattered and ad hoc approach to innovation is likely going to fail. And then finally, start to make small investments, small calculated investments, and know that you're going to make mistakes along the way. It's going to happen. That's part of the innovation process, is that you'll make investments and some will work out and some won't. And not everything is going to be, like I said, not everything's going to be successful. But what you've got to do is continue to test and try and prove out ideas in order to move the organization forward.
Absolutely. Who is it? I think it's Gary Vee that always talks about how he's constantly making decisions and choices and doesn't waste time. And there's a lot of failure in that, and there's a lot of success, but you'll never know. You'll never see that success if you're not trying. So totally agree with that. That was great, Phil. I'm so happy you were able to make it on the podcast with me. I appreciate you taking the time to join me to talk all about innovation and why it is so crucial for businesses.
Absolutely. Anytime, Melissa. I love talking about this stuff. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. And just a final note, innovation is all about taking risks, and you're going to make mistakes. So don't be afraid of that.
I love that, Phil. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Melissa.